Hi there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 2, Episode 12, How to Give Out Accounts in a Way That Prevents Workflow Disruption Whenever Your Headcount Changes. My name is Beck Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. Before we jump in, if you could do me a favor, go to flipthescript.co and make sure you download the deck for this session. It's a really meaty session. I want to make sure you have it in front of you. Once you've done that, let's go ahead and jump in. So let's start with a bit of an agenda. As far as our session today, we're going to break it up into 5 different pieces. Number 1, we're going to go through the issues that we're seeing with most account distribution models. So whenever people are divvying up their accounts to their account executives and their SDRs, what are the problems that they're most commonly incurring? Number 2, we're going to go over a new account distribution plan overview. Number 3, the net results of that new system. Number 4, the new action plan when headcount shifts. So once we have our account distribution plan mapped, whenever our headcount shifts and we have AEs churn and leave the organization and some come back in, then what are we going to do with the accounts? And number 5, the results of that action plan. So let's go ahead and jump in. So I'd hate to be the girl that starts with struggles, but that's what we're going to do. The struggles with the typical account distribution model are the following. Number 1, one of the biggest complaints that I hear from account executives is that the reps say that they don't have high quality accounts. So they say like, oh, my territory is BS, like that's the problem why I'm not hitting quota, etc. is these accounts, aren't either a good fit or I can't really sell into them. And so that is the impetus of the problem here. Number 2, and I'm not going to give solutions to any of these or say my opinion, heaven forbid, Lord knows I would never share an opinion, but these are just the problems that I hear on the back end. Number 2, reps say that other reps have better accounts than they do. So they say like, okay, my name's Brad and Tina has better accounts than I do. Tina's always getting these really great accounts. Maybe the manager favors her or I can't figure it out, but that's the problem. Tina has all the great accounts and I have the dopey ones. Number 3, I hear a lot that there is too much account disruption. So I've heard many, many times from account executives where they say like, hey, I was calling on these 20 accounts and then, something changed. And so I had to stop calling on these 20 accounts and call on 15 new ones. And then at the beginning of the quarter, they made another account shift and I had an SDR fluctuating in and out. I had a great SDR in the beginning, but then they changed and then they took my accounts away and gave me new ones, et cetera, et cetera. But basically their MO and their frame of mind is if you change accounts on them too much, that they don't want to really dig in and invest in the accounts that they have because they're afraid that you're going to just change them 15 minutes later. So especially selling in general, but especially when selling enterprise or strategic, any kind of account change can be very disruptive to their workflow because it takes a long time to sell. So if you're a B2C company and you're watching this, then this is less of an issue, typically from what I've seen. But especially within B2B, it takes a certain amount of time. So if you have a sales cycle anywhere from 3 months to a year and a half for enterprise, which is very customary, especially when you have a POC or trial that's much longer, then any kind of account disruption means that the person has to start completely over with a fresh account. They feel like they have lost all of the work that they've done. I've even seen this with SDRs where they basically think like, hey, yes, I haven't booked the meeting, but I've really loosened the jar. Half of the work is research, personalizing, understanding who you're talking to. And so I hear from account executives and SDRs that any kind of change, especially if you're used to changing very, very frequently, it can cause change fatigue amongst your teams. Number 4, from the leader perspective, I hear leaders talk about that they aren't able to put the best rep on the deal at the case of being fair. So they want to make sure that they are fair to all their account executives and they are fair to SDRs. But what net ends up happening is basically, if an account is there that we need to call on, instead of thinking it solely through the lens of who is the best person to call on this account, who is the most likely person to close this account, they're having to not only incorporate other thoughts about is this fair, to this account executive, like they've been working the account for a while, et cetera. But like at minimum or at maximum that I've seen, they even include the variable of who is the best to call on for this account. But usually the typical case scenario is they don't include it at all. They aren't thinking about it of like, I just want to make my reps internally happy. It's a culture thing, etc. And so now I'm viewing all of my account lists to the demise of the account, to the demise of the revenue overall, and to the demise of the org, and to the demise of the prospect. being prospected into, I'm no longer delivering the best account executive for this account. I'm delivering it to someone just to make things equitable and fair internally. So that is a big concern of leaders. And sometimes they have to meet account executives where they're at and make some decisions based on equity, not based on what's best for the account. Another struggle, reps don't want to start working accounts if you have too much change fatigue. I mentioned it earlier, but their view on this, especially if you're changing out so frequently as every quarter and giving them a new, list of accounts, then they basically say like, I'm not even going to dig into these because the last time that I dug in, this account was stolen from me because of X, Y, and Z reasons. There wasn't a lot of communication around it. There wasn't a lot of thought, into it. And there certainly wasn't my opinion that was warranted. So especially because of that latter case of my opinion wasn't asked, I don't really want to start on these new accounts because the sales cycle is anywhere from, 3 months on the short end to a year and a half on the long end. And I just don't feel like it's worth it because they're just going to change my accounts in like 2 months. So I'm just going to wait for the SDR for inbound flow, either from inbound BDR or from outbound SDR. I'm going to try and close those meetings, but I'm not really going to dig in and get invested in my accounts, especially from a self-prospecting angle, which is something that AE leaders crave that their reps do. Number 2 on this side is they say their SDR isn't as good as someone else's. So just like in the first case scenario, we had Brad, I think I named him, saying, well, part of the problem is Tina has better accounts than I do. I've also heard on the flip end, especially if you're doing a one-to-one pairing of SDR to AE, they'll say like, hey, well, Tina's really, really good because her SDR is really good. So if they're a one-to-one mapping, Tina is matched with Dorothy, and Dorothy is constantly booking these meetings. So the reason that Tina's successful is not because Tina's great. It's because, her SDR Dorothy is amazing, and my SDR Joe is like, meh, so. And so this is something that I hear quite a bit from the account executive side of like, okay, they're constantly comparing, especially if it's a one-to-one mapping solely, their SDR against someone else's, and thinking like, in some cases I have a great SDR, some cases I don't have one that's great. And in that case scenario, I'm going to make that very, very visible to the team and management and basically push some of my lack of quota attainment to attributing it to the SDR. Second to last one is they say that the demo requests aren't equal to the other reps. I've seen this quite a bit in organizations, and it spans across all sizes. Full disclosure, SMB companies, mid-market companies, enterprise companies, I've seen all of them struggle to the same degree usually with their reps saying like, hey, well, instead of spending my time self-prospecting, a lot of times I'll see account executives be like, well, I did a lot of research and, Ben has 20 demo requests for the month of May, and I only had 12 demo requests for the month of May. And so like, that's why Ben's more successful and this isn't fair. And they, get really, really frustrated. So this happens at all levels of org is your AEs are going to be watching. Account executives are wondering whether they have the equal amount of shots on goal as the next rep so that they can attribute of like, okay, can we pull out any of these variables and see who is the best rep? And oftentimes because of the back end infrastructure is so messy, like they spend a lion's share of their time instead of having a really productive, healthy environment, not because they're a bad person, but because they see all these low-hanging fruit variables. And when something's not fair and something's not equal, it can be extremely demotivating to your team that they don't want to swing the bat anymore because they know that their bat is heavier than the next guy. So they basically just toss the bat in and say like they focus all of their time on having this conversation. So a great way to avoid this kind of conversation is not to sit down with the AEs and tell them that they are bad people and they need to stop complaining or they need to focus on their controllables. On a side note, that's always a good idea if you're an account executive. The way to get around this and circumvent these problems is to make everything fair and to motivate everyone in the correct manner. Last one here is you'll see a lot of accounts that aren't actively worked or the AEs not being aggressive on them or SDRs not being aggressive on them because of the problem up here. Like they think that they are going to basically get their account swapped out. So they're like, I'm not going to aggressively work these. I'm just going to take all of the accounts in my name that is possible because I know that inbound demo requests are mapped to the accounts and whoever the account owner is. So you'll see a lot of different account executives try and grab as many accounts as they can because they want the likelihood that a meeting from an SDR or a meeting from a demo request is going to bump up because they have more accounts. So you'll see a lot of AEs that are saying like, I want 700 accounts, not because it's good for the accounts and not because I'm going to prospect into them and not because it's good for my org overall, but because that if I have 700 accounts versus 100 accounts and I am round robined or I am sent the demo requests for any account that is in my name, I want to get as many accounts in my name as possible because the likelihood of me being lobbed over a deal increases with the volume of accounts I own. So you'll see a lot of AEs that are just trying to grab as many accounts as they can and the best accounts they can, and then not actively working them from an outbound perspective, just at the hopes that they can get more inbound requests. So those are the most common problems that I see. Now that we have a whole bunch of problems, let's talk about a new plan that will alleviate those problems. So again, we're looking to make things fair, we're looking to make things equal, and we're also looking to make sure within the new plan that the leaders are able to put the AEs on the best accounts that has the best likelihood of it closing for the account executive that they're choosing. And also that all of our accounts are aggressively worked from the leadership perspective because of the account distribution map that we put in place. So let's dig in. So there are going to be 7 different steps to this new account distribution model. So let's start at the top. Number 1, I would ask for, you're going to think this is crazy, preference. As a starting point, I would have my reps pick out 25 accounts that they would hypothetically like to have and rank those accounts in sequential order. Now, you can pick as many accounts as you want. The reason I picked 25 is the AEs that I've worked with, usually they don't know a ton of accounts that they want to talk to. So they know like, okay, there's 10 accounts that I really want to talk to and I have preference, either I sold into that segment or, they're hyper growth and I really, really like them. But a lot of AEs, some of the frustration is an SDR says like, okay, you think that these accounts weren't qualified. What kind of accounts, what's an actual list of accounts that you want me to call after or call on? And usually the account executive, if they get back to the SDR, it takes a lot of time. And they say like, oh, they realize that finding the right accounts that are appropriate to sell into in terms of technographic setup, in terms of firmographic setup, and demographic in terms of buyer persona role is really, really tough. It's 60% of the work is finding the right person at the right account with the right title that I really want to talk to. And so there's a lot of brunt there. So I would start with, your AEs are going to have some level of preference though. So I would start with, this isn't a necessary guarantee. This is just a ticket to play of, I would say, hey, first things first, before we divvy up all the accounts, I want all of you to make a list of 25 accounts, hypothetically, that you want the most, likely, the most salivatory worthy accounts that you want. And I want you to rank them in sequential order of what order you would choose them if you were doing a draft round. So any sports fans out there, this is kind of like a draft round pick of like, these are the orders that I want people in terms of who I want on my team. Step number 2, I would do a bit of arbitration between reps. So I would collect all their lists. I would have them do them individually. And I would start thinking about looking at these accounts and seeing where is the overlap. So I'm sure, especially within B2B SaaS, if you're selling it, there is going to be overlap. So reps, especially if you have a larger team. So I would always do this per frontline manager, meaning I'm going to divvy up, if I have 1,000 accounts that I want people to call on and I have 4 different teams to do it, and each one of them, has 15 reps or 10 reps, then it's like, okay, I'm going to take those 1,000 accounts, I'm going to divide them up and say like, okay, you're each going to get an equitable amount. And I'm going to have my frontline managers ask the reps out of these accounts, what are 25 accounts that you would hypothetically want as a rep? Once you get those lists of 25 accounts, I would be asking myself the following questions. Number 1, where is there overlap between these reps? Number 2, where is that overlap ranked? Like, I'll give you an example. Maybe I want to call on Drift. Drift is an amazing chat box company, and maybe Drift is number 2 on one person's list, and it is number 24 on another person's list. So I would start thinking about, well, I'm probably going to give it to the person who listed as number 2 because that's a top 10 account for them. So even though this other rep thought drift was important, it was really, really important to this rep. And because they're ranking them so highly, I have an increased chance that they are going to really actively call on that account because they're ranking them top 10. So I would start thinking about what are the rankings for each of these reps, where is their overlap, and for that overlap, I would start doing my own diagnostic process on the following criterion on who is best for the account. Number one, the rep who knows the most people internally. So I am not saying, full disclosure, I want to go on record, I am not saying that you do not need to shoot for being fair. All I am saying is that you need to also consider what is best for the prospect and what is most likely for the account to close, in addition to also being fair. So I want to add more variables into the game other than, internally, like how does this work out? So I have seen I can't even count how many deals we can't figure it out on the back end of how people should be comped or metriced or who should get the quota, etc. And all the while, the prospect is sitting there waiting, ready to buy your software and being gobbled up by competitors because we can't figure out the KPI system internally. So I want to add in a couple variables today. Number one, the first thing that I'd be considering is who is the rep out of these two who want Drift, who knows the most people at Drift internally. Number two, who is the best selling style for the account? So you can get to know an account, on LinkedIn from a brand perspective, etc., and know like, okay, Drift is a hypergrowth company. They have David Cancel. He's amazing. They do the hypergrowth conference. It's a very rock style, etc. conference, very, very cutting edge. They value innovation. They value brevity. They value getting to the point in execution. So I want to know, is there any rep that in his selling style is brief, gets to the point, knows what matters, knows Drift very, very well, kind of really likes those hypergrowth hook companies that are, kind of the really cool guys on the scene. Like, do I have a rep that in selling style fits in there? Number three, I would consider, has a rep sold into companies like Drift in the past? So if I had a rep out of the two reps, one ranked Drift 2, one ranked Drift 24, do I have a rep that has sold into chat boxes in the past? Maybe a rep that really, really worked with Intercom, et cetera, someone who is on the competitive landscape for them. But you want to know, out of the two reps, is there someone, maybe there's nobody out of the two, but is there someone who has sold into that segment or that industry in the past? Number four, I would think about out of those two reps, has one or the other covered that specific industry within your company? So I'll give you an example. I know an amazing account executive, Nick White. Shout out, Nick, if you're watching this. And Nick sold in at one point to cybersecurity. He's working for a cybersecurity company. And so whenever he started working at a recruiting company to get SDRs, within the funnel, I noticed that he started selling recruiting into cybersecurity companies naturally. So point number three is, has this rep sold to that segment in the past? Number four is, has this rep sold into that segment while they've been at my company? So at that recruiting company, if he had already sold into several cyber security companies, then I would say, okay, this is an additional cybersecurity company. So I want to go ahead and give Nick this account, because not only has he sold to them in the past, so he really knows the segment and industry, but he has sold into that segment at our company. Number five, and this is the last variable, and I would rank these in order. I mean, depending on what's valuable to you. But number five, I would consider, has this rep worked this specific account in the past? Let me tell you why that's last for me. This last variable, we do not want to reward people for effort. So a great low-hanging fruit for teams, what they seem like is a low-hanging fruit is, I want to metric and comp my SDR team on activity. Or I want to metric an SDR and comp my team on how many demo requests they set from the inbound line. The reality is that they did not cause that inbound demo request. Shot heard around the world, they did not influence that inbound demo request. All they did was really take the order and set up the time. And so I don't want to necessarily reward for a volume of effort. I want to reward, did this effort work? Especially in sales. Sales reps are metriced and find respect for people who are all about execution, if something worked, not the theory of something. So I have dealt with salespeople for a long time, for my entire career, and I have been one. And when I was an account executive, when I was an SDR, when I was an SDR leader, I was always thinking about, okay, yeah, that's a whole bunch of opinion and theory, or within the training industry, like, yeah, that's your opinion on how I should do that hook, but does this thing actually work? Does this methodology actually get me better results? And so when we're talking about someone, an account executive who's worked an account in the past, I would be very inquisitive in my mind. If they were, why weren't they successful? Why weren't they successful at the onset? If they've worked this account, before and they weren't successful, that does not give me any allegiance to give that account back to the rep. I would be very inquisitive of what was the interaction? Why did we find the need to transfer it? Were they not working the account? Were they not successful? Did they blow everyone up and basically they couldn't get a response? But this would be the last variable that I would only choose as a tiebreaker if all these other 4 variables I couldn't make a decision. So I certainly have no allegiance, because this typically tells me, like, okay, I split this account from this rep in the past, so probably I'm assuming for a reason. I typically don't do things on a whim. So what was that reasoning? And is that preventative, or is that encouraging of me to do it in the future? So do you want the same type of traction that you had with the rep in the past who was on the specific account? So reps are going to claim this a lot as like, oh, well, I was working that account before, so you should give it to me. But I would say, like within account distribution model, I would certainly consider it and hear them out, but it's not my strongest variable. So number 1, we asked them for the 25 accounts. Number 2, I would start, once you get their list, I'd be diagnostic as to where there is overlap, where they've picked other accounts, where they're ranking them, how many accounts they're really going to receive out of that ranking based on the following 5 variables. And number 3, let's say that I have one rep that for whatever reason only got 8 accounts out of those 25 because there was overlap and everyone had ranked accordingly. And most other reps on average were getting 15 out of the 25 that they preferred. I would find some way to basically think through in my mind, maybe someone comes in from a referral case scenario, maybe someone comes in, in the future where there's some kind of arbitration, and I would slight things to their favor, the 8 account rep favor in the future. So you can say like, hey, I'm going to give you these 8 accounts for now. I try to make this as least public as possible, of like not being public about the account level that everyone got. If you think this isn't fair, think about comp. You're legally not supposed to say the comp that you are paying as a leader from rep to rep and let everyone else know, because it's super inappropriate. So I would say like, hey, I'm going to give some of you some of these accounts based on criteria. I'm going to be very objective. I'm going to be middle of the road. And if one rep, I would just know if one rep got 8 of their 25 and one rep got 15, then I would say, okay, I'm going to try and make this up to them on the back end because they didn't get as many accounts as they wanted as this other rep. So you can do that through a number of ways. Again, deals that are referred into you, or preferential treatment in terms of, maybe someone was a channel sell and you want to send them over. But I would, in the future, just be cognizant of that, of like, hey, I'm going to equate these things in the future. Or maybe on the additional accounts that you're going to give them, you could give them really high net accounts. Number 4, motivating based on effort. So I would instill the rule that if an account hasn't been actively called on in the last 60 days, it is up for grabs for reps, any rep. Now, you can change this number to anyone out there thinking 60 days is too long, hike it down. Or if you're saying that's too aggressive, hike it up. But I would instill some type of rule of like, hey, I'm not going to take this account away from you if you don't work it, and you aren't sending calls over and emails over, et cetera, and really trying to till this ground. But I'm not going to proactively take it away from you. However, becomes available for other reps to take. So you want to make sure, I come from Texas and my mom always said you need 2 things to get someone moving. You need the promise of the kingdom and the threat of the fiery gates of hell behind them to get someone going. And I agree with that. We want to be fair to our reps. We want to motivate them and we want to encourage them, but we also want to keep them accountable and say like, hey, my, view as a leader and our view as an org is these are some high high net value, great, awesome accounts. And so I want to make sure that you're working them. I'm not going to proactively take them away from you so that you don't see a lot of reps, at day 59 sending out BS emails. But I want to say that these accounts are up for grabs. So it can cause a culture thing on your team of like, oh, okay, I really need to be working these accounts and working these accounts as a team. Otherwise, someone else, one of these other reps is open to work it. So if you don't use it, you lose it. Number 5, I would motivate also based on effectiveness. I have never seen this done on a team before. So I've seen a lot that they'll put in the rule of like, okay, you have to work the account under 60 days. If you don't do that, I'm going to take it away from you. I also put in the rule that if the rep wasn't able to book the account within 180 days, then it is also up for grabs from another rep. So you want to measure 2 things. Not only effort, like was this person calling on the account, but was this person successful at calling on the account? So in some case scenarios, you're going to see people who they haven't worked the account, they want to keep it in their name, in case if something ever comes in. So they will send an email over on day 59. So it resets the clock of like, okay, I made 1 cold call to this account, so this account is now mine. That might work for rule number 1, but it will not work for rule number 2 because they didn't do anything to really actively book the account. So if they haven't been successful, then it's like, it's time for it to be open to another rep. So I put both rules in tandem, and it is absolutely deadly with my teams because the teams are not only thinking like, okay, I need to send over some BS email to, earmark the account, but I need to try and book this account within 180 days. Otherwise, anyone else can steal it. Getting really pumped. That rule works really well. Number 6, I would give an upper limit. This is very common in the industry. I would give them a maximum of 200 accounts. I come from the school of thought that no more than 200 accounts. I don't know how many friends I'm going to make in this conversation and how many foes I'm going to make, but my personal view is that I know that I can't personally keep track of certainly more than 200. I would argue that a rep can't keep track of more than 75. So especially if you're going a personalized approach, which in all B2B, I typically recommend, regardless of segment that you're selling into, not B2C, but B2B. If I'm going a personalized approach, I am now tasked with knowing people. So at an SMB company, typically people will have anywhere from 3 to 4 buyer personas. So it's an SMB company, you're going to have at minimum 3 to 4 people that you can call into, unless you're very niche. If you are working a mid-market segment, that usually bumps up anywhere from 10 to 20 people that you can call on when you start to include frontline managers, second-line managers, directors, VPs, etc., and ICs. And then when you get into enterprise and strategic, you can call on upwards of like 100 to 200 people. And so when you start let's take the minimum threshold of 4 people, for an SMB company, which, that's not the most common segment, you got 200 accounts times 4, you have 800 people. 800 people that you need to know their background, know things that they're doing, try to keep up with them, to sell into them. So I think 200 should be the maximum, but you can, obviously, I'm going to stick in my lane here. I would the point being you need to set some level of maximum of the number of accounts that they can have in their name. I would suggest 200 in the high end. I would even have the temerity to do 100. And then number 7, to maintain consistency, I would say as a rule, I would Noah in the Ark this one. Noah in the Ark means, there was a promise in the Bible made from God to Noah that once he did the flood, that he would never do a flood to wipe out humanity again. And so that was the rainbow was a sign of that, of the promise that he made to Noah. So I would make a promise to my reps once I go through this process of like, hey, we're going to reset accounts. We are going to do a new system. And after we have done that, I think you guys are really going to like this system. It's going to put the favor, back in your hands and the responsibility back in your hands and accountability back in your hands, but also the choice. And once we do this, I will never mass shift accounts again, unless it's to the favor of reassigning a great account that's mid-cycle to the account executive of like, hey, I'm never going to do this massive thing again. You will have no more change fatigue. However, if an account comes in and an AE churns on the account, which we'll talk about how to do later, then I will reassign these accounts to your favor. So the only thing that you can get in terms of changing accounts is to the positive. Three last things here. Round robining the inbound pool. I thought I had 7 steps. Apparently I have 10. 10? 10. I have 10 steps. Number 8, round robin the inbound pool. So I'd use automation to round robin where the account ownership goes and only dictates the account meeting type, but not the overall meeting volume. So remember how earlier we were talking about how a lot of reps complained that their inbound volume is different. You know, they say, oh, Cindy gets 100 demo requests and I get 50, or Tom gets, 30 demo requests and I get 15. People are all about being fair. If you think back to whenever you were a kid, if your brother or sister got a lollipop, then like all of a sudden you get a lollipop. That's how it works in our minds. It's like you always have to make things fair. So, if Ben doesn't get, dessert, then I typically don't get dessert either. It's a no dessert night. So certainly to the positive, if someone gets something positive, there's no quicker way to drive frustration and fights on your team than giving one rep preferential treatment, especially if it's repeated. So in terms of the inbound pool, we want to make sure, and they are watching. If you're watching this video and you're an account executive leader, your reps are watching the demo request numbers, the volume of inbound, the amount of accounts they have, the type of accounts they have, and they're wondering if everything is fair. I would use automation to round robin where the account goes in terms of inbound for demo requests that only dictates meeting type, but not volume overall. So what I mean by that is, let's say that I have 5 accounts in my name, and 3 out of those accounts requested demo, and the next rep that has 5 accounts in their name and only 1 account requested demo. And there is 2 more accounts that requested demo afterwards that aren't either one of our 5. So in the former case scenario, typically companies would say, well, the first 3 demo requests go to the rep that owns them, and then the one that goes to the one for the second rep would go to that person. And then we have 2 more additional demo requests. So we're going to give 1 each. And what ends up happening is rep number 1 has 4 net demo requests, 3 in segment and 1 out of segment. And the second rep has 2 demo requests, 1 in segment, 1 out of segment. So how you can quicken that and righten that reality, it's super, super seamless, super, super quick. I'm going to give a shout out to Chili Piper because I actually did this with them. They ran a case study on it. Is I would set basically, okay, these first 3 demo requests came in, for this rep. And then the 1 demo request that went to the second rep, so it's 1 versus 3. And then the 2 alternate demo requests came in. They would both go to the second rep, because we want to equal the pool. So anything that is out of segment, which demo requests typically are out of segment, it's very, very hard, shout out to marketing teams, very, very hard to pull demo requests within a targeted account list. It's just very difficult, especially with decision makers. So you want to say like, hey, okay, rep number 1 got 3, rep number 2 got only 1 on the inbound pool. And so these 2 came in. So I'm going to skip this first rep twice so I can equal the amount that they're getting overall. So you can equal the amount of pools that they're getting overall, with the out of segment demo requests. And so if you use Chili Piper to do that, there's a really, really easy way to do it to make sure that all of your reps have the same amount of inbound pool. Step number 9, now we're going to get meaty. Round robin the outbound pool as well. There is a problem that an SDR is matched to an AE, and if an SDR is stuck with a great AE, then they get great accounts and a great volume of meetings. If they're stuck with a lackluster AE, SDR, if they're stuck with a great SDR, they get a ton of meetings and great meetings. If they're stuck with a lackluster SDR, then they get not so many meetings, and again, it's not fair. So how we can make that fair, and this is what I've done with my teams in the past, is basically I let them have a certain amount of ABM accounts. So my account executive can have, let's say, 100 ABM accounts, and then they have 100 non-ABM accounts. So even for the outbound pool, I tie them in terms of the ABM account 1-to-1, so they do form a relationship with the SDR and the AE. But for all of the non-ABM accounts, I round robin. So if I have a lackluster SDR and they aren't booking any kind of ABM accounts, and let's say SDR number 1 booked 5 accounts with an ABM for the first account executive, Rep number 2 only booked 1. For all of the non-ABM accounts that were booked in the future, then basically it would fill up rep number 2 to hit 5. So yes, they were not within ABM necessarily, but they both have equal pools in terms of outbound. So typically the difference between ABM in reality, I'm not going to talk about the theory, but I'm going to talk about the reality for orgs. Typically the ABM accounts, the difference between ABM accounts and non-ABM accounts that are qualified is, from what I've seen, AE choice. Maybe one additional criterion, but I think there's this theory that ABM is this magical, all these amazing counts that we would die to talk to, and everything else is junk. And I've actually seen in a lot of case scenarios the reverse. So marketing is schluffed with this list of like, find ABM accounts and market to them. And it's like, well, maybe you're marketing to a company that looks good on paper, but is actually unqualified whenever you call into them. So typically the difference in net reality between ABM and non-ABM, if you are defining on some kind of criterion, like I'm not saying non-ABM, you should just any account ever, but if you keep the defining criteria tight of like ABM is defined as someone who on paper has a web conferencing software, is within B2B tech, and is anywhere from 300 to 500 people on LinkedIn. Non-ABM could be 300 to 500 people, B2B tech, and we don't know if they have web conferencing software. So very, very slight difference. Some cases I've just seen that it's AE preference, and that can oftentimes be based on whim. So I usually give my account executives 100 ABM accounts, 100 non-ABM accounts, so that hits the 200, and then their SDR is mapped to them in terms of the 100 ABM, and then the SDR can have 100 non-ABM run the gamut, so maybe in this non-ABM portion, they have 20 accounts from Ben, 20 accounts from Dan, 20 accounts from Bo, 20 accounts from Karen, 20 accounts from Devin. Right? So they do have 100 non-ABM accounts, but they're all pooled across the account executives. And in terms of those non-ABM accounts, they go round robin. So we make sure that even the outbound pool is equal. Maybe not in terms of meeting quality, because it's ABM versus non-ABM, but in terms of meeting volume. So it's all about making baby steps, in my opinion. It's very difficult to go net, even, director title, etc. But let's talk about how you would do that if you're going to try. Step number 10. I have gone as aggressive as to go on a points-based system for meetings. And let me tell you why. Let me start with what a points-based system for meetings is. A points-based system can be predicated on 2 variables. Number 1, what is the potential deal size? And I base that typically on the variable that typically means more money to my org. So I'll give you an example. My former org, we sold into sales seats. So how lucrative a deal was based on the amount of salespeople at a company. So I would bracket out, okay, pre-segmentation, I have SMB companies, I have mid-market, and I have enterprise. Every company defines it differently. So I defined SMB company as, for outbound perspective, we only want to sell into companies with 20 to 50 sales reps. Mid-market, I'm going to define as 50 to 200 sales reps. And enterprise, I'm going to define as 200 plus. So it is more lucrative for our company to hypothetically sell into a 200 plus account. So I'm going to give my reps more points to book those. So I don't even necessarily care what the point values are, be dependent on the quota. And I don't even necessarily care what those brackets are. If it was 20 to 80 and 80 to 300 and 300 plus, or it's, 1 to 5 and 5 to 10 and 10 to 300. It's like you just need to define and put some kind of direction and definition on paper for what good and great looks like for you. So in terms of account size, potential deal size, I would not rank it on employee size. I would try to go to the variable that is the highest likelihood that it's a leading indicator that this sale is bigger or smaller for you. Sometimes it's employee size, but oftentimes it is not. The second criterion for a points-based system is level of title in the room. So if you're in sales, it matters if it is a decision maker or it's a champion or an influencer or it is an individual contributor in Groundswell. That is just the fact. So I learned very early on as an account executive, I remember that I closed a deal when I called into someone like actually pretty low. and I closed this deal, and it was the most toxic thing for me in my sales career early on. Because I remember going to my boss, and my boss was like, you need to call in higher. And I'm like, no, I don't. Like, I just closed this massive deal off of going in lower. So for the next 4 deals that I did, which keep in mind, I was selling enterprise, so each deal hurts. I was calling in low because I had had success with getting things going somehow with that first deal. So the next 4 deals, I had to learn my lesson that I would go in with this, person that was lower down the funnel and get everything approved and do the audit and da-da-da. And all of a sudden, I'm walking into this room with the final decision maker, and I realize that there's a completely different set of pain points. There's a completely different setup, what this person cares about, agenda that they're metriced on. And so it was very, I'll call you, you don't call me kind of thing. So I had to learn my lesson very, very early, and unfortunately very painfully, that the level of the person in the room matters. So on a points-based system, you want to reward from a comp perspective that level. So I would suggest what I've done in the past is manager is worth 1 point within the 5 or however many respective disciplines you have for buyer persona. Director is worth 2. And VP, CXO, head of is worth 3. And then you can even do it's 0.25 for an SMB deal for manager. It's 0.5 for, a SMB deal for a head of. And then it's 1.5 for, VP of SMB. You can tell me the totals and in terms of segmentation, but you get the gist of it. It's a tic-tac-toe board, and basically you want to reward reps from a comp perspective to hunt up channel in terms of the meetings that they're setting. So when it comes to account distribution program, I would incorporate that. We all know, if you're watching this video, probably know that a meeting with an individual contributor at an SMB company is not nearly as valuable as a meeting with a vice president at an enterprise company within your respective discipline, typically. This is a generalization, but that is typically the rules. So I would want to make sure not only are my reps being equal in terms of volume of appointments, but they're being equal in terms of the types of appointments. So it might seem a little extensive. I understand if you stop at 0.9, but this has really helped me understand, okay, maybe rep 1 got a great meeting with the vice president enterprise, and rep number 2, I want to equal that out by giving them 3, frontline managers at SMB. So net, they're equal. Higher volume, lower quality, lower volume, higher quality. And you can basically ask your reps, which ones would you prefer? But you need to stack rank against that, because otherwise you'll start to get the problem again of my meeting wasn't equal to that person's meeting. And so that's why I'm not hitting quota, and I'm pissed off at SKO. So I would suggest putting in some kind of point system. And again, shout out Chili Piper. You can even round robin the inbound pool based on making the points even. So if someone inbounds in demo requests and was a manager, and someone inbound demo requests and is a vice president and goes to the first rep Ben, then Cindy would get the next 3 meetings that are a manager because it's equal weight in terms of value as the meeting that Ben got. So that is the KPI system. The results of the new KPI system, let's go into. Number 1, reps have the accounts they want. They chose 25 accounts, and they have the onus of having involvement in the accounts that they choose. Number 1. Number 2, when you instill the rule that basically after 60 days, if someone hasn't called into it, or at 180 days, they haven't booked the meeting, any rep can take it. Reps can choose the accounts that they want to steal from one another. However, they have an account maximum of 200, 100 ABM, 100 non-ABM. So when reps come to me and they say, my accounts are BS, I say, change it. You know the qualifying criterion. All I'm saying is that you need to have 100 ABM and 100 non-ABM. Go change it. You can either pick from the available pool, or you can, wait for accounts that people aren't calling on or aren't be effective on, and you can poach them at day 181 if they haven't set a meeting. But that really puts the keys back in the rep's hand. So it solves a lot of these hypothetical fights, because when they come to me and say, my accounts are BS, I say, no problem. It's on you. I gave you an original account list. You're more than welcome to go through our account list and pick the new accounts that aren't quote unquote BS. So it solves that argument and really infuses a level of accountability of the keys and the responsibility are both in your hand. Number 2, leaders are equitable to all reps. You lose a lot of capital if you are seen as someone who is a leader that's not fair, and you gain a lot of capital if you do extensive notion to say like, hey, I'm the leader that is going to be objective. I'm not going to favor any reps in terms of who is my friends or who I like selling style, etc. We're all human, but you want to be seen as a leader who is always net going to make the most objective, rational decision that is fair, for all the reps and is fair for the accounts, prospects, and orgs at large. So this kind of system says like, okay, I'm going to consider the concerns of other people. I'm going to rank, these accounts, or you're going to rank these accounts for me. I'm going to distribute them out of the ones that you have preference, and then you can pick the rest with an ABM or non-ABM. Number 3, this is probably the most powerful. The onus and power to choose good accounts is now on the reps. So people want to be in control of their own destiny. And when you take that ability away, they're going to start to get very, very antsy and start to blame things. So onus and power is back in the reps' hands for SDRs and account executives. Hey, if you think that your accounts are BS, or you think that you want to sell into a different segment, or not segment, but industry vertical, etc. Peace be to Journey. Go roll the dice. Here's the account list in our CRM. We have 1 billion of them. So especially within SMB and mid-market, I'd say all the way up into enterprise, your TAM usually can be, pretty extensive, especially if you're selling B2B tech. So it's like, okay, you pick the accounts, you tell me where you want to focus your time, and then it takes all the brunt off of you as a leader to constantly be thinking about who's getting what account. Number 4, all accounts are worked and no one holds accounts in their name. If they don't get rewarded from a volume perspective with inbound demo requests or outbound SDR for having more accounts in their name, and they have the clip rules of if they don't work the account in 60 days and they aren't affected by booking a meeting in 180 days, it can be stolen, you're going to have your reps choosing the right accounts and saying, I'm going to only choose enough accounts that I can work. Otherwise, they're going to be taken away from me anyway. So this really net, it makes sure that all the accounts that you really want are worked. And the last piece here, and this is for all the leaders out there, it enables you to put the best rep on the account. So if someone churns, mid-cycle, then I can start being diagnostic of like, okay, who's the best rep to put on this account? If there's someone who's slighted in the preference 25 pick, then I, might send it to them. But I can really be diagnostic since reps are picking their own accounts of, okay, Drift just came in, or we had an AE churn on Drift. We need to put someone else in. Who is the person that I think is the most likely to actually take this thing over? So now let's talk about that last case. Now we know the new account distribution program, but let's talk about the action plan when headcount shifts. We are during a pandemic. People are shifting more than ever. Unfortunate to say, a lot of companies are doing layoffs. A lot of people are saying like, okay, I want to switch into something else. People are moving. They're going back home, like me, living above their garage at 34. I digress. Headcount is shifting. So what do we do about it so we can make sure, again, one of our goals is that we don't want change fatigue and we don't want our reps feeling like they shouldn't invest in accounts because of how often they're shifting. So number 1, there's going to be 3 steps to this slide. Number 1, let's start with how to swap in an AE without losing traction. Pretty simple. Go to season 2, episode 9, where I go in through all the extensive pieces that you can do to swap in an AE without losing traction losing traction in the deal to best close the deal. So go to that session. I know that might be frustrating, but that's how I would do it. Number 2, if you do already have a backfill for the account executive, let's say someone churns, this is the least case scenario typically from what I've seen. You usually don't have a rep waiting when someone churns on you unless you are the one doing the churning. So if you catch my drift, but if you do have a backfill AE ready and you feel comfortable, I would transfer the book cleanly. So I'd say, okay, Ben's no longer at our org. Cindy is coming on board. So Cindy, you now have Ben's accounts. You can get to know them. What this really ensures is, number 1, you don't have to restructure anything. But number two, Ben probably was looking at multiple different kinds of accounts, whether that was within segment or whether that was within how salivation worthy they were. And so you are not guaranteed, but there's high likelihood that Ben had a good book of business going. And so Cindy can kind of step in clean and say, okay, these are my new accounts. How am I going to hunt them where Ben wasn't effective? And I'm going to swap in on the deals that he currently had running. And then number three, in the most likely case scenario, you don't have an AE to backfill. In this case, I would do 3 steps. I would take the high priority deals, meaning the deals that are mid-cycle that Ben was working, and I would break them up per rep. I would, again, use the criterion on the first slide of when I'm evaluating which rep I should give this to, but I would break them up to the reps that I have existing within my team. Number two, I would ask them, let's say I have a delta of Ben had 50 accounts, or Ben had 200 accounts, 100 of them were ABM, 5 of them were mid-cycle. I thought through who should be on those deals, and I went to the rep and I have some of those deals, and I would go to the account executive and say, hey, I have a deal with Drift. It's mid-cycle. Ben churned. Do you want this deal? They'll probably say, yes, I'm on it, coach. I hope that they would say that. This is a deal that's already mid-cycle, an open pipeline. And I would say, okay, cool. So can you choose an ABM account, because Drift is ABM, choose one account that you want to lose. You have 100, so you just tell me which one. So I'm going to keep the integrity of my number of 100, ABM accounts, but I'm also going to give the onus to the rep of number one, do you want this account? And if they say no, then it's great, keep going. And I go to the next rep. I'd ask a couple questions, but I'd go to the next rep. So it gives them the power back of number one, do I want this Drift account? And if I do, then I need to swap out an account for it. And so number three, I get to choose the account that I'm swapping out for it. So you'll start to see account executives really feel like they're a team member with you. If you're not coming in and forcing and saying, call on Drift, you need to swap in mid-cycle. You're saying, number one, do you want to work this deal? It's highly lucrative. Number two, if you don't, then okay, or if you do, great, pick the account and let's swap out the account cleanly so you maintain the integrity of 100 ABM, 100 non-ABM, but you also have them working Drift. So it's not a mass change, it's just a single account. The last piece of this puzzle is, let's say that Ben had 100 ABM accounts, and some of them were really great and salivation ready for the account executives. They said, oh, Ben has got Oracle. I've wanted to work Oracle forever. Can I have that? And I would do the same type of rule. Hey, you can have Oracle. Let me see what everyone wants. Let's get a list from Ben's accounts. I'm going to make sure they're all equal. And then if you get 3 net accounts of Ben, swap them in, swap out 3 ABMs that you don't want, and throw them in the pile. One last rule here, I would try to swap ABM for ABM and non-ABM for non-ABM. And let me tell you why. You don't want your reps just kicking out junk into the account list, because then if you have new onboarding reps, they basically are strapped with a list of accounts that are junk. So I would try to go tit for tat, so to speak, of if this was an ABM account, they have to swap out one of their ABMs. And if it's non-ABM, they have to swap out non-ABM. And if you don't have an ABM model, you can do, they can just go cleanly. The results of that action plan are the following. Number one, it's fair to all reps. Number two, the high priority accounts like Drift that was mid-cycle are called on. 3, deals that are mid-cycle are handled by the best rep, because you got to be diagnostic about who you assign that to. Number 4, reps don't feel slighted because they chose the exchange. You ask them, do you want Drift? And if you do, which one do you want to swap out for it? So the power is back in their hands. So they don't feel slighted. This was their decision. Number 5, reps aren't in account overload. They don't have a ton of accounts where they don't know what to do with them. Number 6, arguably the most important, reps feel empowered because the shift was at their approval. So they were the one that not necessarily came up with the decision, but they are the ones that approved it. So they feel like their destiny, not only because they can choose their own accounts and they can swap out ones that are quote unquote bad, but they even approved a account shift for the great accounts that were mid-cycle. Number 7, you don't have just junk accounts for the onboarding rep because you went ABM to ABM and non-ABM to non-ABM. And then number 8, all the accounts are effectively called on with outcome and effort because of that 180-day rule. If they don't have the outcome, that you want, then maybe they kept the account from day 59 to 180 because they did send a call over or one kind of fake email, etc. But if you aren't getting the outcome you want, per usual, you want to flip the script and change it. So in summary, I know that we are in very, very tough times. COVID is not fun. It has been one of the, obviously global pandemic. I'll say no more. However, I do think there is a way to be very logical, very practical, and very pragmatic and really empower our reps through account distribution. And it all comes down to how you think about it. So that is everything. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. If you like this session, you want to see more, if you go to flipthescript.co, we have a litany of different sessions there on all kinds of different sales topics. If you really love this session and you want to help a girl out, go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn and tag me in your top 2 takeaways so I know you want to hear more of. But either way, I hope you have a great rest of your day.